If you've ever lain awake at night doing math in your head, watching numbers rearrange themselves on the ceiling until they stop making sense, this story is for you. If you've ever reached a number you once dreamed of and felt nothing but the quiet, sick certainty that it still isn't enough, this story is for you too. Because the question underneath all of it, the one you never quite let yourself ask out loud, has an answer. And it is not the answer you expect. Today I want to tell you about a monk who was asked by a man who had spent his entire life becoming wealthy a single question. A question so simple a child could say it, and so heavy that grown men have avoided it their whole lives. How much money is enough? The monk's reply took only 7 words. 7 words that undid a merchant's understanding of his own life in the time it takes to exhale. But we'll get to them. First, you need to understand where the merchant came from and what brought him, robes dusty from travel, to a door he had sworn he would never knock on. Before we go further, tell me in the comments, honestly, what number sits in your head right now, the one you believe would finally let you rest? Don't overthink it. Just the number or the feeling if you don't have a number. You might be surprised how many people carry the exact same weight, dressed up in a different amount. The merchant's name was Devaram, and in the valley where he lived, his name was spoken the way people speak of weather systems, with respect and a little fear. He had begun with nothing, the youngest of 6 children, in a house where dinner was sometimes rice and sometimes just water with the memory of rice. He remembered with a clarity that never dulled the particular hunger of being 10 years old and hearing his mother tell his father, in a voice she thought the children couldn't hear, that there was no more to give the youngest one that night. He had promised himself, lying on a mat too thin to soften the floor beneath him, that hunger would never again have permission to enter his house. That promise had built an empire. By the time he was 40, Devaram owned warehouses in 3 port cities. He owned ships that carried cloth and spice and timber. And he owned, though he would never have used this word, the quiet terror of men who worked for him and could not afford to disappoint him. His hands, once cracked from carrying water jars, were soft now, unfamiliar with anything rougher than silk and parchment. He had a wife who wore jewelry from 4 different kingdoms and rarely wore the same piece twice. He had sons who had never once gone to sleep wondering if there would be food in the morning. He had, by every visible measure, won. And yet, there is always an and yet in stories like this, and you already know it, because you are living your own version of it. And yet Devaram could not sleep. Not from noise, not from worry about thieves, though he kept armed men at every gate. He could not sleep because somewhere in the last 20 years, the counting had never stopped. He would close his eyes and see ledgers. He would drift toward rest, and a column of numbers would rise up behind his eyelids, demanding to be checked one more time. He had built a fortress against hunger so vast that he now lived every night inside a smaller fortress of his own making, one with no door out. His wife had noticed it first, the way the successful often have someone who notices before they will admit it themselves. She told him gently that he flinched now when a servant dropped a plate, as if the sound itself cost him money. She told him he had stopped tasting his food, that he ate the way a man eats when he is thinking about something else entirely. Devaram waved this away 3 times before he stopped waving it away, because on the 4th telling, he realized she was right, and that frightened him more than any market collapse ever had. It was his youngest son, 12 years old, who finally said the thing that sent him walking. The boy had asked, with the terrible directness only children have, "Father, if you already have more than anyone in the valley, why do you still look worried when you open your ledgers?" Devaram had no answer. He realized, standing in his own study, surrounded by more wealth than his childhood self could have imagined existed in the world, that he did not know the answer to a question a child could ask. And a man who has built his entire identity on knowing things, on calculating things, cannot survive very long not knowing the one thing that actually matters. So he did something his warehouse managers found genuinely alarming. He left. No guards, no ledgers, just a plain cloak and a walking stick, heading up into the hills where it was said a monk lived who had once been offered a position advising a king and had declined it, choosing instead a bowl, a mat, and a small garden he tended with his own 2 hands. Devaram had heard of this monk the way wealthy men hear of things they secretly envy but publicly dismiss as an oddity, a wasted life. But that night, lying awake once more with the ledgers rising behind his eyes, he found himself thinking of the monk's bowl. Just one bowl. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than dread. He felt curious. The walk took 3 days. On the second day, his soft merchant's feet blistered inside boots that had cost more than most families in the valley earned in a season, and he laughed out loud at the absurdity of it, a rich man crippled by expensive shoes on a dirt road. But what he didn't know as he laughed was that this was the first genuine laugh to leave his body in over a year. His body was already teaching him something his mind wasn't ready to hear yet. He arrived at the monk's small dwelling at dusk on the third day, exhausted, blistered, and for reasons he could not name, close to tears. The monk, whose name was Anong, was kneeling in his garden, pulling weeds from around a row of vegetables with unhurried patience, as if the weeds themselves were not a problem to be solved, but simply a fact to be tended. He looked up at the wealthy, wrecked man standing at the edge of his garden and said nothing at all. He simply gestured to a flat stone nearby, an invitation to sit. Devarim sat, and this is where everything changed, though neither man knew it yet. For a long while, nothing was said. The silence unsettled Devarim in a way that negotiations with hostile merchants never had. He was used to silence being a weapon, something you deployed to make the other party uncomfortable enough to concede. But Anong's silence held no weapon in it at all. It simply was. Eventually, unable to bear it any longer, Devarim blurted out his question, the one that had walked him up 3 days of hills on blistered feet. How much money is enough? Remember this detail because it matters later. Anong did not answer immediately. He finished the row of weeding he was on. He rose slowly, walked to a small clay jar near his door, and drank water from a wooden cup, offering Devarim a cup as well. Only after both men had drunk did he sit back down across from the merchant and look at him with an expression that held no judgment in it whatsoever, which somehow made Devarim feel more exposed than judgment ever could have. "Tell me," Anong said instead, "what you were afraid of, the day you decided to become rich." And here the merchant's carefully organized story, the one he told at dinners and to investors, the story of ambition and vision, began to crack open into something raw. He spoke of the mat on the floor. He spoke of his mother's voice through the wall. He spoke of hunger, real hunger, the kind that has a smell and a sound and a particular way of making a child feel small in the world. Anong listened the way the earth listens to rain, without interrupting, without hurrying it along. But what Devarim didn't know was that Anong was not simply listening to a sad story. He was watching, carefully, for the moment when the merchant's voice changed, when he stopped describing the hunger of a 10-year-old boy and started describing, without realizing it, the hunger of the wealthy man he had become. It happened about 20 minutes in. Devarim, describing his most recent quarter's shipping profits, used the exact same tone of voice he had used to describe the empty rice bowl. Fear, still fear, just wearing better clothes. And this is where everything changed. Anong raised a hand gently and asked Devarim to stop. "You have been telling me 2 stories," he said, and calling them one. "The first is the story of a hungry child who needed food and had none. That story ended decades ago. You have more food than you or 10 generations of your family could eat. The second story is the one you are still telling yourself every night with your ledgers, and it has nothing to do with hunger at all anymore. It has only borrowed hunger's voice, because that is the only voice you have ever trusted to make you move." Devarim sat with this in silence for a long time, the valley growing dim around them, birds settling into the trees for the night. And here we finally arrive at it. The 7 words the merchant had walked 3 days and endured a small breaking open of the heart to receive. Slowly, Anong looked at him and said, "Enough is not a number. It's noticing." 7 words. Devarim would repeat them to himself for the rest of his life, in ledgers, in storms at sea, on the day his youngest son asked him why he finally seemed to sleep. Enough is not a number. It's noticing. Sit with that for a moment, the way Devarim had to. We are trained almost from childhood to believe that enough is a destination, a specific figure on a page, a balance in an account, and that once we arrive there, the fear will simply switch itself off like a lamp. But fear, the kind born from old hunger, old scarcity, old fear of being small and powerless in a world that once withheld something essential from us, does not answer to numbers. It answers to attention. It softens only when we actually notice what is already, right now, sufficient. Not what will be sufficient someday, once we cross some invisible finish line, we keep redrawing further away. What already is, that merchant is you. Every time you open your banking app hoping the number will finally make you feel safe, and it doesn't, and so you tell yourself that next month's number will be the one that finally does the trick. That merchant is you when you compare your progress to someone else's and feel the old hunger flare up again, wearing a new disguise. The attachment isn't to money itself. It's to the promise that a future number will rescue you from a fear rooted firmly in the past. And a future number can never rescue you from the past because the past isn't a debt owed in currency. It's owed in attention, in presence, in the simple willingness to notice, here, now, what you already have that is real. This is the single idea I want you to carry out of this story tonight, and I want you to resist the urge to complicate it, because it resists complication on purpose. Attachment to a future number is not the same thing as providing for your life. You can plan wisely, save carefully, work diligently. All of that remains true and good and necessary. But underneath the planning, there is a difference between preparing for tomorrow and trying to purchase safety from a fear that has nothing to do with tomorrow at all. One is stewardship. The other is a hunger that no amount of gold has ever actually fed, because gold was never the thing it was hungry for. So what do you do with this? Not as a theory, but tonight, in your actual life, with your actual worry still sitting in your chest. Here are 3 small things, small enough to do today, that Devarim himself began doing on the walk back down the hill, blistered feet and all. First, tonight before you sleep, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not abstract things, specific ones. The particular way afternoon light comes through your window, a friend who answers the phone at an inconvenient hour, your own 2 working hands. Devarim's list that first night was almost embarrassingly simple. His son's laugh, the smell of rain on dry ground, a full night's sleep he hadn't yet earned back but could still remember having once. The list is not meant to erase your financial worries. It is meant to interrupt, even briefly, the story that says nothing you have counts until the number is bigger. Second, choose one moment tomorrow, just one, to practice noticing instead of calculating. When you eat, actually taste the food instead of thinking through your day's expenses. When someone speaks to you, actually hear them instead of half listening while your mind runs numbers in the background. This sounds small. It is small. It is also, according to a man who once could not taste his own dinner, the exact muscle that had atrophied inside him and the exact one that needed retraining, one bite, one conversation at a time. Third, ask yourself the question Anung asked Devarim, but turn it toward your own life honestly. What are you actually afraid of underneath the number? Not the surface fear, the vague dread of not having enough, but the older one beneath it. Was there a moment, a specific one, when you learned that scarcity was something that could happen to you? Naming that moment does not solve it instantly, but you cannot loosen a grip you refuse to look at, and Devarim's grip only began to loosen the day he finally spoke his hunger's name out loud to another human being. Picture him now, if you will, some years later, an old monk in a small garden at dusk, and beside him, a man in far plainer clothes than he once wore, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds with his own 2 hands, no longer soft, no longer strangers to work. Devarim had not given away his warehouses or his ships. He still provided, still planned, still worked. But he had stopped mistaking the ledger for the answer. In his own voice, years later, he would tell his grandchildren, "I spent 40 years trying to outrun a hunger with money, and the money only ever ran faster than I did. It wasn't until I sat still long enough to notice what I already had that the hunger finally slowed down enough for me to rest." And the moral, the one worth carrying with you long after this story ends, is this: you are not broken for wanting security. You are simply, like Devarim, like most of us, chasing a feeling with a tool that was never designed to produce it. The feeling of enough was never going to arrive by mail with your next paycheck. It was always available closer than that, in the noticing, in the tasting, in the naming of an old fear so it finally loses its grip on the wheel. If this story gave you even one moment of peace tonight, there are more waiting for you here. Stories drawn from the same quiet well. Next time, I want to tell you about a king who traded his crown for a single night's sleep, and what he discovered he had to give up to actually get it. Until then, walk gently, hold loosely,